All right, we're going to get started. So it's Monday, so I have already gone through everybody's project proposals. For the most part, I think everybody's application looks workable. I suggested a few changes to a few of you. There's a few people whose databases are not sort of fully fleshed out. And there are a couple of applications where you're being quite ambitious, which is okay, but I suggest you might have to build the application in phases because you may not get everything done that you had laid out in the next couple of weeks. But by and large, people's project plans were fine. Again, just a reminder, a couple of you are working with people in the Wednesday class. If you're working with someone in the Wednesday class, then your project is still due on the Sunday night, okay, in a couple of weeks. So what we want to look at today, one of the requirements for your assignment is to implement authentication and security. So basically, most of your web application is going to be private. There's basically just a home page, register, login. Those are the only public pages. So Microsoft's made this fairly easy. They've given us a series of libraries that we can plug into our application that will handle most of the authentication for us. Won't do everything, but it will do a lot, so we don't have to hand code all of it. So what we're going to do today, there's quite a good tutorial right on Microsoft's site. So it's basically a walkthrough of taking an existing web forms application like the one we already have and implementing security on it. So I'll show you that link shortly, and then you've got two choices. If you want to challenge yourself, you can just go ahead and try and implement it on your own. If you want to go through it together, I'm going to kind of go through it step by step as we go. Okay, there are a few minor changes if you're going to do it on your own. You'll need to make to the code that they give you, but by and large, most of it will run out of the box. Okay. So just to get us thinking about security. I mean, this is something we did in a PHP application, but we did it a long time ago. It was over a year ago. Okay. So what I want you to do is just take 3 minutes and make yourself a quick list. You can use a list in Excel would work, or bulleted list in Word. And think about, we've got this public web application that we've been building over the last several weeks. Where did we get to last week? Right here's our application. I did mark your labs as well, by the way. Anybody who submitted a lab will have a mark. So we have this application, but it's all public. So I want you to take 3 minutes, starting now, make a list of what elements we're going to need in order to add proper security measures to this, to turn this application into a private one. Just make yourself a little list, give you 3 minutes. Time's up. So, what's on your list? What's one thing on your list that we're going to need? Kevin? Okay, yep. Richard?
Register.
Yep.
Credential check. Flash validation.
Yep. Josh?
Redirection.
Can you explain that a bit more? What do you mean?
Because you check if they're authorized or unauthorized. If they're authorized, you pass them through to wherever they would have gone next. If they're unauthorized, you redirect them back to the login page.
Okay.
With a message.
Okay.
Information control. There's different levels of login and what information they have access on each page.
Authorization.
Okay, so that's really authorization, right? Yep. Mallory?
Couldn't hear what you said, but like unique username, password, and password encryption.
Okay.
Is that limited to the password?
So password encryption or hashing, right? What's the difference between encryption and hashing?
Hashing, you can't get it back.
Right, hashing, there's no way to convert the hashed value back to the original value. So we probably want to use hashes. They're going to be more secure. You said rules around passwords would be a good idea, right, that we're enforcing. That, you know, somebody can't put in A as their password is probably a good idea.
Yes.
What about like user session expiring after?
Yep, we'll want that. Otherwise, we don't want somebody to be logged in and stay logged in necessarily. I mean, we might give the users that option. It's generally not a great idea.
It's not, but so many people do it.
I don't recommend it. One other, we've got almost everything. There's one important thing missing. Kind of similar, related to the expiry.
Session variable for
Starting the session?
Nope, think of the opposite of that.
log out.
Yeah. Right? We've got to give the user a way to actually remove their login and their active session. They shouldn't have to close their browser, shut the machine off in order to do that, right? They should be able to click log out, and it should remove any variables from their session and their login. Okay? So we're going to need all of those things. We used most of them in PHP, and the Microsoft Identity Package, it kind of takes care of a lot of this stuff for us. We're still going to have to build the pages, but a lot of the under the hood code, rather than us having to write it all ourselves, we can just call functions in the identity packages, which is going to make life a lot simpler for us. Okay, so I'll add that list here. So just a quick review of how this works. You know, so authentication and authorization, they go hand in hand, but they're related concepts, but they're not the same, right? Authentication is all about identity. Who is this user? Do we know who they are? Are they anonymous? And if we know who they are, who specifically are they? Authorization tells us once we know who the user is, what are they allowed to do? So for example, in Blackboard, if you're logged in and I'm logged in, right, this section here has to do with authorization. We both can get to this page, but these little drop downs here that I see that you don't, and this section all has to do with our authorization. What role are we in, and what permissions does each type of user have within the page? So our typical method is authenticating through use of a login form, right? So our workflow really is something like this. The user gives us a username and password. We do a credential check, as somebody mentioned. And the way ASP.NET Identity works is it creates a ticket. Basically, it creates a cookie with information about that session. Now, there's different places we can store our users. We can actually log them in through Windows. So if we're running an intranet, every user actually has an account on the network. We can log them into our web application. In a public web application, obviously that's not going to work. We're not going to be creating network accounts for every user. So typically, I mean, we could hard code user accounts into the web.config if we only have 1 or 2 users. But typically, we're going to want to use a database store. One of the other nice things about the ASP.NET Identity Package is when we go to implement it, it will actually build, we don't have to build any database infrastructure. When we install the package and try to register for the first time, the package will actually check whether our database has the 6 tables that the identity package uses. And if it doesn't have them, it just goes ahead and creates them for us. So we don't actually have to build those tables. So we're going to let the identity package create the tables, then we can look at what it does. The other thing that it uses for managing roles and permissions, it's got a few baked-in classes. One is called the principal class. So a principal is an authorized user, and then one principal can have 1 or more roles. So we're not limited to only being in one role. one user can actually be in different roles. So this is kind of where we're going today. I just want to skim through. They've kind of got a bit of an introduction on here on the official site about how the ASP.NET Identity Package works. So they've sort of evolved this over time. In the first couple iterations of ASP.NET, there was no built-in library. You just had to code all, you had to manage all this yourself. You built your own user table, you wrote your own sort of schema for this. They created back in 2005 in .NET 2 this system called ASP.NET Membership, which was a basic authentication scheme that you could leverage in your application. They've evolved this over time, and 2 years ago they kind of made a new version called ASP.NET Identity. So it evolved from the old ASP.NET Membership. I just want to kind of skim through this and I'll point out a few of the highlights here. So one benefit is it does work in a non-relational store. So if you have a really simple application, you can still use all this code, but you don't have to use SQL Server to store your users. You could just store them in web.config if you want, if you only have, let's say, one user account. So the ASP.NET Identity Package runs on all of the frameworks. So MVC, Web Forms, Web API. So it doesn't matter what type of application you're building, what the interface uses, this package will handle the security, which is good. Okay. It's got role providers, so we can easily create different roles and put users into their roles. Okay. It also integrates with social media providers, so there are already class libraries for doing things like Google, Facebook, Twitter logins, and that's baked right in. So we're going to use the ASP.NET Identity, we'll use a few packages which we'll have to install. It's going to add quite a big overhead to our application. It's probably going to add 20 or 30 megs worth of package files. It also uses Microsoft's middleware called OWIN. It's basically used for the login and log out, and it uses cookie authentication through OWIN. And again, we could use this for other types of Microsoft apps, including mobile apps or desktop apps. They all use this same middleware. So these are the main packages: ASP.NET Identity, Entity Framework, and Identity OWIN that we're going to wind up adding. And they've kind of given us a good tutorial. We're not going to go through this, but this is a look at sort of all the packages that are involved. So we're going to install this, the main identity core, and it will install a bunch of supporting packages for us. So we can do that all through Visual Studio. But it's going to make our application a lot bigger. And it uses OAuth, which is how it talks to, for example, third-party authentication providers. So what we're going to do, if you can log in, if you're not logged into Blackboard already, if you can log in and open up the Lesson 10 folder. I'm just going to leave this tab open. I may come back and refer to it a little bit. If you want to open up the last link, which is the ASP.NET Identity tutorial. So the title pretty much says it all. This is exactly what we want to do. We have a completely public web forms application, and we want to implement security in here. Now, if we were to make a brand new web application from scratch, and rather than creating an empty application, we pick ASP.NET Web Forms, which we did back in week 1, it actually already bakes all this stuff in for you. So if you're starting from scratch, it's got all the packages included. It auto builds a login and a register page for you. So that's always an option, is to start that way. Now, one thing to keep in mind, in the tutorial, they use a local database. We don't want to use a local database. We want the user store to be using our Azure database along with where the rest of our application is. So we'll have to make a few changes when it comes to the database configuration section of this. So this tells us, how to start by creating a new application. We don't need to do this. So what I'm going to do is open up my solution from last week, export it as a template, and then create a lesson 10 solution for today from last week's project.
Just wondering, for the packages, we need core, ON, and identity framework?
Yeah, I'm going to go through it
Okay.
one bit at a time. So I'm going to open up last week's solution. You can grab it from Git if you want to. You will have to change the credentials that are in web.config if you take my project from GitHub.
Is this with the lab or without the lab?
Oh, yeah, my suggestion is, yeah, my version doesn't have the lab, but I would use your lab because your lab version is more complete. So if you've done the lab, take that version because it has more functionality than the in-class version. So you could take your lab 3. So I'm just going to create a template from last week. Yeah, I think most of you did Lab 3, so it would make sense to use that. And I will make a new project for today. That's 10. So I'll create my new application here and just get it running. So this is basically a copy of where we left off last week. I have not added the paging and sorting to mine. I haven't done the lab, basically. I should. So this whole thing's public. So here are the changes we want to make to this. What we want is that this page is public, our default page. This navigation should be hidden unless our user's logged in. So when the user first loads our application, we should get the home page and we should get register and login links. These links should be hidden. Once they register and log in, then we should see these links and we should see log out. We also want to make it so that these pages are private and users can't, if they click on any one of these pages, even if they know the URL and they try and go directly to any of the department's courses or students pages, we want to block them if they're not logged in and take them to the login page. So we should be able to implement all of that. 3 hours is plenty of time to get this running. So we've got our application set up. So I'm going to skip down. So the next thing we need to do is we need to get the identity packages installed. Now if I go to my project directory, I'm just going to take a quick look at how big the folder is right now. So right now it's 32 megs with what we've got so far. It's going to get bigger. So the first thing we want to do, and again their tutorial's slightly off here. So the way, if we right click our project and choose Manage New Get Packages, and then we want to search in the Online tab, it says search for identity.e. We just need to search for the word identity. So I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer, right click my project, choose Manage New Get Packages. Make sure you're in the Online section here. It might default to the installed packages. We want to go into the Online section and search for identity. So when we find that, that package, we're going to want to install this Microsoft.asp.net Identity Entity Framework. So I'll just click Install, and it will say it also requires the Identity Core package. So there are some dependencies within here. So just click Accept. So when I go into my packages now, we can see that it installed the Identity Core and the Identity Entity Framework.
So what do I search?
Identity. No, that actually didn't add too much. That only added not as much as I thought.
Identity Entity Framework?
Yeah.
The only one we grabbed?
Yep, for now. So it will install it will install the Identity Core as well. Just fine. So the next thing we want to do is we want to build a register page. So I'm going to close the package manager. I'm going to right click my project, and we're going to add a web form with a master page, which I will call register. And we'll use our master. So I'll give it a title of register. And we're just going to create a simple form with a plain text box for username, 2 password boxes, and a register button. So we'll need 3 labels, 3 text boxes, and a submit button. I'm not sure why it's not recognizing my text box, but
Maybe you need to close it with text box.
no, I can self-close it. Let's see if it shows up. Yeah, it's there. So we want a password box, and our third box I'll call txt confirm. So we'll need this attribute in our password box. This way our characters will get obscured as we type. Now I could add some ASP.NET validators and required attribute, but the nice thing is the ASP.NET Identity Package will do all that stuff for us. We don't even have to add validation, for example, checking passwords or making sure something isn't blank. Curious if I do this. And then we'll put on a submit, a register button. Our form will look something like this. And I'll double click my button to get my event handler written. So we haven't really done anything new here. We've just built a basic registration page. So right now nothing should happen. When we click here, so now let's go back and see what we need to do. So in the tutorial, they've actually given us the markup for a form. So they've included username, 2 password boxes. They called their button, they didn't actually even give it an ID. They just called it, call the function create user. They also had a label here, a literal, for a message. We'll maybe add that on so that after we register, or if there's any validation errors, we can print a message. So maybe here. I'll put on one more div. I'll call it form group large. We'll put on a label. We'll give it an ID of LBL status.
Using ASP label as type?
Yep, because we're going to use it to dynamically display a message. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that might not be a good class for it.
Should it be like label?
Label. Yeah, we'll try label info. Yeah, that's maybe better. So we'll use this, we'll use the text property of that label to display either any error messages that the identity package generates when we're trying to sign up, or if it encounters no errors and it's actually able to add the user, we can print a message here.
Which was it that you copied from the other page?
I didn't copy anything.
You said we'll do something from that you saw on the other one.
I'm not sure, Peter. We didn't copy anything. I didn't copy anything.
Okay.
All the code here we've added manually. So we didn't copy any of this. We just used this as a template, but built our own.
Okay.
So they've actually given us the code here for when the user clicks the button, what happens. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add these 2 references. Our page, we don't need the system and system.link reference. All our pages already have those automatically. But we need to connect to the identity and .identity framework package in order to make use of the classes in there. So we will reference the identity packages. So we use both the base identity package and the entity framework for identity package. Now I'll take those out of mine once we add the code, and you'll see that none of the classes that are there are going to get recognized without those references. So let's take a kind of a look here at what's happening. So we're trying to create a new user as well as use the built-in, there's a built-in class called user manager. So what we want to do is create a new identity user from our username box. We'll have to change this because we called our text box txt username and the n is lowercase. So it tries to create a new user. First it creates a user and passes in the username, and then we get a result back where we also add the password. So one of the nice things is this is actually going to check whether that username, the reason it's done in 2 steps is because this step is actually going to check whether the username already exists. And if the user doesn't already exist, then it will try and create a new user. And just calling manager.create will also hash our password for us.
So any of the result object automatically has any errors for whether there's already.
Yep. So the result object will have a succeeded, which is a Boolean, right, which we can evaluate. And if succeeded evaluates to false, we can see what we get. We can print on our label, our result has an errors collection. And we can get the first error and print that on our label.
So is the result, is it built into the
Yep.
user or?
Yep. So what we'll do, we'll add this code into our button, and then we can actually use the Object Explorer to look at some of these classes that we're going to be working with. So grab this whole section inside of the create user. We'll have to make a few changes because their objects are named differently than ours. So I'm going to grab that that section of code, everything inside my create user click, and we'll paste it inside of the click event that we've got on our application. So there's a few things here we're going to need to modify. The first one is that this is their text box for username. They've called username in camel case. Our text box has a txt prefix, and the n is lowercase. So on this line, where we're creating the new identity user, we're going to have to change that value to match our text box name. Same here. They called their original box password. We need to call it txt password. And then they called their label status message. Our label is called LBL status .text. So we'll need to change those 2 lines as well. So if we look at what's here, so let's look first at the user manager. It has a create method.
For some reason, it's not accepting my TXT.
Make sure that you've named it exactly the same way in both your HTML and your C#,
Yeah.
including the case. And that you have a run at equals server attribute on the box. So we can see in the user manager some of the methods that are here. So we can add claims, logins, password. We can add a user into a role, so create a user account and then assign a role to that user. It also has built-in things like check the password, change the phone number, confirm their email, find them by name or email. We can check whether an account's logged out. So all of this stuff is baked into the user manager. We can send them email, we can send SMS. If you want to send a text message to a user, we can lock them out. This is a very, very robust package if you think of how long it would take us to actually code all this stuff. So we don't have to in .NET ever. Let's just use this. So we get back a result. Create gives us back a result. So it creates the user, associates it with the password provided. So now if we look, Hayden, just sort of coming to your question. So this is what we've got with result, right? So it has a succeeded Boolean, and then it has an errors collection as well, which we can evaluate.
And that's all done through the result.
It's all done through the result object, that's right. So our user account has these properties, things like ID, email, their logins, hash password. So those are all the built-in properties. You know, we can also set up for doing phone number confirmations. For example, we send somebody a code, we send a code to their phone number. That stuff's sort of baked in here.
That's using a local database, is that the same?
At the moment, well, through the tutorial, the database part we have to configure. That's what's coming next. So they've kind of given a little bit of an explanation. So identity user is the default implementation of the user interface in the core. And then we've got user store, user manager, which gives us a series of APIs, and the identity result is the result of a register login operation. So they're setting this up to work with our local database. We don't want to do this. So this just creates, this will actually create a new database called, with an MDF extension, and it'll put it in an app data folder. We don't want to do this. We want this to run with our existing Azure database. Now, there's something I should have done previously that I didn't, that we'll have to change. I'm just going to open up my web.config. Now, we let the Visual Studio wizard create this connection string for us when we created our data model, right? So it included this stuff, these extra tags related to our models, and then the connection string kind of started here. We provided the provider, the data source, the database name, etc. So we're going to need a simplified version of the connection string. The other thing that would have made this easier, by default, if you notice the name in the tutorial, the ASP.NET Identity Package by default looks for a connection string called default connection, which is why I had you name yours default connection. The problem is the default connection string we already have includes all of this other entity framework stuff that we actually don't want. So we're going to wind up with two versions of the connection string. We're going to have to rename this one. And then we'll add another one called default connection, which has a simplified structure without all of this stuff at the beginning. It basically will just contain the server name, database name, username, and password, without the funky syntax that's in here. Now, this also means we've used default connection throughout our code, so we're going to need to do a find and replace in our code. So I'm going to call this one default connection EF for entity. That's our entity framework version. So I'm going to rename that in my web.config. So open up your web.config, go to your connection line, and just add EF on the end.
Connection string default connection EF. And save.
And save.
Okay.
And now we're going to do a global replace. If I click on Edit, Find and Replace, and choose Replace in Files, if we search for default connection and replace it with default connection EF,
Really?
and I'm going to say look in under find options. We don't want it to change in the web.config again, so I'm just going to choose look at these file types and choose this first option. It's basically just in our C# CS files.
First option?
Yeah, so pick the first one. That won't change our web.config again. And I'll replace all. I'll just say yes to this. So I'm going to compile my solution and make sure we didn't break it. So I should still be able to load my department's courses and students.
Nope, field errors. Work for me.
Yeah, so application still seems to work. So if I go in and open any one of those pages,
What happened? The source file.
so it just replaced my default connection with default connection EF.
Why did mine break?
So we want to write a simplified version of this in here. So let's try it this way. If you just go to Server Explorer on the left, we should be able to get Visual Studio to write the connection string for us. So go to Server Explorer. Under Data Connections, right-click, and choose Add Connection. Actually, sorry, before we do this, we might want to grab our server name from the existing connection string. I'll just go to scroll across my web.config. I'm just going to grab the server name here and copy it to the clipboard. So this will be your sort of random string of letters and numbers, .database.windows.net. You can also, if you're logged into your Azure panel, you can grab it from there. We already have it in web.config. So just what I've got highlighted in blue.
Source copy.
So just copy that. And we'll go back to Server Explorer. I'll say I want to add a data connection. I'll paste that in and put in my credentials to my Azure database. So your server name, your username, password, and the database name. You can click Test to make sure you can connect.
Yeah.
And then you can just click OK.
Wait, just use an existing database?
Yeah, we're connecting to the same database.
Oh, okay.
We just need a simplified version.
I didn't get a new one.
That's okay. Actually, we didn't need to do it. We already had it here. I thought it would give us a new one. That's okay. Well, all we want is this simplified version of the connection string. So if you just select your connection, right-click it and choose Properties. Over here in the Properties window, you can see the connection string. We just want to copy this. So in here, if I just click in here where it says connection string, click Control-A and Control-C. So that'll copy the connection string.
What is Control-S? Save.
Control-S is safe.
So then underneath here, I'm going to type add name equals, and this one we're going to call default connection, because that's what the identity package wants. And then the connection string equals, and just paste that in and close the tag. It probably removed your password. You'll need to put your password in.
Yeah, it's all Asp.
Sorry?
Yes, you're right.
So you can notice this is a simplified version. It doesn't have all the metadata and the funky quotes that the Entity Framework designer generated.